Everyone on time. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you all here today. My name is Catherine Dougal, and I'm the Development and Engagement Specialist here at Bridge, Michigan. Today, we're going to be discussing Michigan's labor pipeline issues. And this event is a part of Bridge, Michigan's monthly lunch break series, where we discuss issues important to Michigan residents. If you aren't familiar with Bridge already, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, statewide news organization, and you can read our coverage every day for free online at bridgemi.com. I also want to thank our Bridge members who are with us today and who help support our work. If you are not already a member and would like to become one, you can do so anytime on our website, and my colleague Amber DeLinde is going to drop a link into the chat. So the schedule for today's discussion is that we'll begin with a conversation between Bridge, Michigan business editor Paula Gardner and our special guests. We will then open the discussion to reader questions for our panelists. Throughout the discussion, you can enter your questions into the chat window at any time. And if you're calling in today, you can email your questions to us at membership@bridgemi.com. Just so you know, we are going to be recording this conversation and we'll be posting the recording in Bridge, Michigan tomorrow. So now on to introduce the special guests we have joining us today. First, we have Brian Calley, who is the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, a role he's held since January 2019. Prior to his role at SBAM, Brian served as Michigan's 63rd lieutenant governor from 2011 until 2018. During that time, Cali was the driving force behind two historic tax reforms that were the catalyst for significant private sector job growth in Michigan. During his tenure, more than 555,000 jobs were created, and Michigan saw the lowest unemployment rate in 18 years. As Michigan's lieutenant governor, he also spearheaded regulatory reform, infrastructure improvement, and employee engagement efforts. Much of Brian's public policy work centered around inclusion for all Michiganders, regardless of the challenges they face. Prior to serving as lieutenant governor, Calley served 2 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives, 2 terms as Ionia County Commissioner, and worked for over a decade in community banking. He holds degrees from Michigan State University, Grand Valley State University, and the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Calley has been honored as one of Crain's Detroit Businesses 40 Under 40, and has received recognition for his leadership by organizations across the state, including the Small Business Association of Michigan, Special Olympics of Michigan, the Michigan Manufacturers Association, and the Mental Health Association. He has also received national recognition from Autism Speaks and the U.S. Junior Chamber, which named him one of the 10 outstanding young Americans. We are also joined today by Peter Ruark, who is the Senior Policy Analyst at the Michigan League for Public Policy, where he specializes in workplace justice and job quality, adult skill enhancement, post-secondary education, public assistance, consumer financial protection, and corrections. He is active in national groups, including the Economic Analysis Research Network, previously served on the board of the Michigan chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, and in his free time currently serves on the boards of the Friends of Turner Dodge House, a Lansing historic landmark, and the Lansing Poetry Club. Peter was awarded the President's Award from the Michigan Association of Community and Adult Education for his advocacy on behalf of adult education funding, and was recently featured on NPR's Marketplace, where he discussed at length Michigan's use of federal public assistance funds for various state programs. Prior to joining the League in 2001, Peter directed an after-school tutoring program for at-risk children in Grand Rapids, taught English at the university and high school levels in China, and worked in the mental health field. Peter holds a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Psychology from Calvin College and a Master of Social Work with a concentration in Policy Planning and Administration from Western Michigan University. And now that I've introduced our guests for today, I'll pass it over to Bridge, Michigan business editor Paula Gardner to get us started.
Good afternoon. So I think the whole pandemic made us think about employment and jobs differently. We may have thought of it on a personal level before, and we may have paid attention to the unemployment rate. But what we've seen over the last year and a half now is a bigger understanding of what goes into the labor market. We've seen so many people lose jobs. We've seen so many businesses have to cut jobs. as they faced restrictions and other changes from the pandemic. And now as we go back, we understand that the unemployment rate maybe isn't the best indicator of what's going on out there. And one example is a coworker told me this morning about going to or walking past a pizza parlor in his neighborhood, and it's suddenly closed on Mondays. And there's a sign on the door saying, we just can't find enough workers. So this is something that's in all of our faces right now. We're experiencing it as consumers, as human beings, as people, as residents, as business owners, and people who are just wondering where the state's recovery is going to go as a result of it. So my first question is for Brian. What are you hearing from employers, particularly your members in SBAM?
Well, we just, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thanks for the great work that Bridge does, and Paula, you in particular, just the in-depth reporting that happens from Bridge is unusual these days. I mean, to really get into the weeds on issues, appreciate the quality of the work that you do. We actually just surveyed our members. We've been doing this throughout the pandemic. The Small Business Association of Michigan is a horizontal trade organization. So any industry can be a part of us as long as you're small. We have over 28,000 members that are spread across every county, literally every county in Michigan, and every industry you can think of, and a whole bunch of industries you've never thought of. So it's a good cross section. But when we surveyed our members, we found that there was actually a good amount of optimism, even though they had been hit very, very hard. Now, caveat is that the only ones that answer the surveys are the ones who have made it this far. So some businesses that have gone out of business wouldn't have answered, but we did see that about 3 out of 4 were optimistic about the future. There's about 14% that were pessimistic about the future. The optimism number has grown. The neutral part has shrunk, but the number of businesses that are pessimistic has been largely consistent throughout this pandemic. And I think what that tells you, especially as you look at industry numbers, that there are some industries that recovered pretty quickly from the depths of the spring of 2020, and there are other industries that just now are beginning to recover, and are at a time when they're like last to the table when it comes to raising a workforce, and so are having extraordinary difficulties. Number one, by far in the survey, number one issue that business owners described to us was that the difficulty in finding employees, even though most reported also having raised wages.
Okay. Peter, could you tell us exactly where you are in looking at the labor market and what you're hearing from groups that you speak with?
Sure. I'd like to mention that my organization, just for people who don't know, we're a nonpartisan policy institute that's dedicated to economic opportunity for all in Michigan. We're the only state level organization that addresses poverty in a comprehensive way, and we analyze the impact of state and federal budgets and policies on residents with low income. And I'd like to say we've been at this for more than 100 years, not me personally or any of us personally, but the league has been around for a long time. We don't, as your listeners and viewers may know, the Michigan League for Public Policy doesn't really work directly with people providing direct services, but we do partner. We have a community engagement team that interacts with a lot of local faith-based groups, food pantries, community-based groups, that kind of thing. And what we're hearing is, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of hardship in Michigan over the past year, and whether it's the hardships people are facing through unemployment or childcare, or just trying to juggle family needs, work needs, working from home needs for those who are fortunate to be able to work from home, and certainly those who have lost their jobs. It's been a very bad time for them, and unemployment insurance is one way that the state and federal government have been able to look out for the people who have been affected by that and provide a stopgap safety net.
You did mention unemployment, which I knew we'd get to at some point, but since you mentioned it, we might as well do that right now.
Okay.
Like I'm hearing a lot of reasons for for employers not being able to fill jobs. I think they run from childcare, they run from not feeling safe in the workplace, due to pandemic type issues. But a lot of business owners do suggest that it's the unemployment, the state unemployment, which is set with the federal bonus of $300 a week, which is set to expire by Labor Day, which is acting as a disincentive to work. So I guess I'd like to hear from both of you where you stand on that.
You want to start, Peter, and I'll come up the rear.
Oh, okay, works for me. We definitely appreciate the fact that UI is there for workers. One thing that is worth mentioning is that the UI benefit that people get, the weekly benefit, even with that $300 federal addition, that federal supplement, is $662 a week. So that's equivalent to roughly $16.55 an hour full-time. Well, it is equivalent. So that's right about at the 33rd wage percentile. So that's not high wages necessarily. We're talking, it's equivalent generally to, what we might consider lower paid work or modestly paid work. One thing that we did notice, we saw that Bridge article that there were 800 workers lined up for Flint for jobs starting at just slightly over that amount, $16.67 an hour. We need to take that into consideration. We do believe people want to work. We can always hear anecdotes maybe about somebody saying they want to just ride out their unemployment insurance to the maximum number of weeks, because they don't want to work. And, and I don't deny that maybe there are people that do that, but what our community engagement team and some of the other partners that we have been hearing is people want the security of having a job. One thing with discouraging the work search, I would like to address, what we do need to do is take into account that there are 217,000 fewer people in the labor force than there were before. And so those people are not receiving UI. So when we're looking at the unemployed people versus the people who have just simply left the labor force for whatever reason, that could be contributing to a perceived labor shortage in some parts of the state. One thing that I would like to say also is the average duration of unemployment insurance benefits prior to the pandemic for years was about 12 weeks out of the 20 weeks available. As your listeners may know, workers can receive unemployment insurance for up to 20 weeks during normal times in Michigan. It used to be 26. But, generally they're not pushing it right up to that limit. They're finding work, and it's been 12 weeks. During the pandemic, it was 14 weeks out of the 26 available in 2020, and 15 out of the 26 available so far in 2021. So there's a study from the Chicago Federal Reserve that concludes that unemployment insurance recipients actually search for work more intensely and are more likely to stay attached to the labor market, which strengthens the economy for all of us. And here's one other thing about unemployment insurance. There's the argument that federal benefits are holding back the recovery because certain employers can't find the workers they need, and perhaps UI is a disincentive. But along with the fact that work provides economic security. We also have to remember that the money from unemployment insurance, and especially from the federal $300 a week supplement, has really been helping local economies. For every dollar that's spent on UI in a local economy, it will turn around and generate $1.61 in economic activity. There's one Harvard study, by the way, that shows that when the pandemic first set in, customer spending in Michigan fell immediately by 36%, between February, when we were doing well, to March, when everything shut down. But by June 1, following the implementation of these expanded unemployment insurance benefits, customer spending had already returned to pre-pandemic levels, despite the fact that the unemployment rate in Michigan in May of last year was 21%. So that spending is important. That spending, I would say, has probably been a lifeline for a lot of small businesses in the more distressed communities, because that money is there. People, for example, without the extra unemployment insurance, might not have bought as many clothes for their kids for school, this past year, or, done some of the other things. So, that part of UI has to be taken into account too, not just, whether it affects work or not, which is not really convincing, because remember that the UI benefit, even with that 300 supplement, is still only $16.55 an hour. And
Sure.
Many people would like to earn more than that.
Sure. Just to set the stage a little bit for some of the things that you tackled, the unemployment rate in Michigan as of April, I think that's the last that came out, was 4.9%. And then we have the other 217,000 people who have stepped out of the labor force. Recently, the unemployment, people who are on unemployment do have to say that they're on a regular basis have to submit documentation that shows that they're looking for a job. I have not had a chance to do any reporting on how that's going, or whether that's making any difference at all. But that's the work search requirement that Peter did mention. So there are a lot of changes that way with unemployment. And I think, you did touch on some of the stimulus and how it affected the economy. I think economists all agree that some of the big picture stimulus definitely helped bolster things. But there are these questions now on these weekly unemployment benefits as things kind of tail off, and the effects on the economy. So Brian, why don't you take it from there with what you are seeing?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a complex issue in terms of the workforce shortage. We came into the pandemic with certain workforce shortages in the first place. And obviously it's been exacerbated by a number of issues. So maybe we could come back to some of the other issues that I think that matter. But I do also think it's important to acknowledge that that individuals, to me, it's not a question of laziness. I'm not accusing anybody of being lazy and not wanting to go off the federal unemployment benefit, but why would we expect anybody to make an irrational personal financial decision to re-enter the workforce if they've got other types, it's going to be transportation, they got to commute, they maybe have to arrange for childcare. Maybe they can make 15 or 16 or 17, or even we're hearing a lot from employers that even when they're over $20 an hour, they're still having a hard time even getting applicants. And part of that is because these are industries that were last to the table, right? The workforce shrunk. Everybody else was allowed to kind of reopen and hire people, and the industries last to the table are struggling more. So part of it is the timing of when they were looking to rehire people. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it really, the situation as it exists today, it does allow for individuals to have the option of not reentering the workforce as early as they otherwise could. How big a difference would it matter? It's one of the levers that government policy actually does have some impact on. So it would be our hope that as we try to transition into this hopefully post-pandemic period, that that we would return the unemployment system to something that looks more similar to pre-pandemic levels, simply because there is such a demand for people, and we do see rising wages, and we do see that businesses pulling out all the stops. There's one in order to try and attract employees, but one of the kind of unintended consequences that I'm fearful of in between now and the fall, if the unemployment benefit survives that long, the extra unemployment benefit survives that long, is that businesses today are having to figure out how to operate with fewer people. They just have to. They're evaluating, does it really make sense to be open at this time when we don't have as much traffic? Maybe we just don't reopen at that time. And then they're gonna, or maybe they find new ways to automate things, or they're just figuring out, because they have to, how to deal with fewer people. And so by the time we get to the fall, there's no saying that there aren't permanent changes that require fewer people that will go into effect. It's one of the things kind of under the surface right now. Entrepreneurs are very creative, innovative people, and they will figure out how to operate with whatever they have available at the time. And so with this percentage, and I don't know how big it is, I will fully acknowledge, I agree with Peter that it's not, I don't think it's most people, but whatever that percentage of people that it is that look at it and say, you know what, it just, for me personally, it doesn't make sense for me to re-enter the workforce right now. When they are ready, some of these opportunities may very well have dried up.
That's a very, very scary thought for Michigan's economy and what we're looking for jobs in the future, I believe.
Yeah. Can I respond a little bit to that? I really appreciate that Brian mentioned the things like childcare and transportation and things like that. And I hope that, you know, we can kind of have a basket of lessons learned from all of this. How can we support workers who want to work, need to work, and have those kinds of barriers, and for, like he said, maybe very rational reasons, have not gone into the workforce or not gone back into being employed, even though they otherwise would want to. So I look forward to having those kinds of conversations as a state.
Great. One thing I'd like to hear, and maybe some of our viewers would want to throw some examples into the chat, or what are some of the extreme examples that people are seeing out there? I think some of mine are, I was told by a friend that they went to a Wendy's once and there was a single employee there who basically apologized and said, you know, things are going to be slowly, but I'm cooking and taking your order and doing absolutely everything else. I'm hearing about a fast food restaurant paying $18 an hour in northern Michigan in tourist type areas where this is, of course, the time that they are getting ready to make their money because it is seasonal up there. I'm seeing billboards every time I travel out to Grand Rapids and back. I see billboards of factories that are hiring. And I'm not sure that's quite different. I think factories have had, or manufacturing has had a difficult time over many years. But what are some of the more extreme examples that you're hearing out there?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, actually just personal experiences recently that were all involved in the same trip. I had a series of meetings last week in Washington, D.C. And so I went to the airport in Lansing, and with this airline, there was like a backup of people trying to check in, but there's nobody at the counter. And it turned out that there was just one employee available, and he was up like letting people in a plane, at a different plane, at a gate. And then he had to run back downstairs to the gate to check people in, take luggage, print tickets, whatever happens at the gate. And then he had after he got through that line, then he had to run back up and then let those same people check him at the gate to let him on the plane. So like that, I mean, and this poor guy, I mean, he was definitely having a tough day. then I was at a restaurant recently, and the entire experience, there was a QR code at the table. It brought up the menu, and then you ordered on your phone. Then a person brought the food out, but then you paid on the phone. The only time that you dealt with a human being at a sit-down restaurant was when they brought the food out. And I don't know, it could have been maybe the cooks even that, you know, made the food and delivered it to your table. I'm not really sure how that all worked, but it would, you know, and I don't know whether or not those types of practices will survive on into the future, but that was really where it came home. Like, I mean, they're figuring out how to operate with a lot fewer people. But the other kind of, the other thing, and admittedly anecdotally, but one thing that we're starting to hear from business owners is that even though they're trying to stay open as much as they can, they feel like they have to close more because they're going to just burn out the staff. And I think about those staff members the examples that I shared with you, and they really seem like they're having tough days trying to manage like all of this work without a lot of help. So I think that business owners are really sensitive to the fact, like, I don't have many employees, and I want to be open, but I can't. If I burn out my people, I'm going to have even fewer employees. So we just have to figure out. And the final thing too, in case it comes up, in small business owners, like the actual owner is an employee of the place. I mean, they just do whatever needs to happen. Like if they got to check people out, they got to take orders, they got to stock shelves, they got whatever they got to do, because it's their operation, and they're there all the time. But that's the, as we think about all these different professions that people are in, and part of it is what you get paid, but part of it is the quality of the work, how you feel about the work, how orderly the work is. Do you love going to work every day, or do you hate going to work every day? And some of these workforce shortages, I think, are contributing to tough industries being even tougher right now. And therefore, the attractiveness of going into the industry kind of creates a cycle. The attractiveness of going into that industry goes down because of the workforce shortages themselves.
Well, it's interesting in the two examples that you gave, travel and restaurants, both of them suffered so much during the pandemic, and you would hope that we were putting them on a level playing field, or even encouraging them a little bit extra to come back and to actually regain what they had lost. So, it's hard to hear that type of story. But I also think, like, oh, that poor worker, are jobs going to get better? Like, are employers thinking about their workers in a different way right now? When you mentioned worrying about burnout, is there a kind of an awakening of job quality right now, in addition to pay?
I think that's why you see that service businesses, which are the ones struggling the most, that last to the table, last to try to rehire their folks and their employees that you had to find something else to do for a living, that they're opting just to close sometimes. So you're seeing, we're closed because we couldn't find enough employees, and it is specifically because they can't create an unworkable work situation for the employees that they have. So I do think that there's some sensitivity to that. When we surveyed our members a few weeks ago, we found that most had been doing pay raises, but that in and of itself is not going to make up for the actual job being a miserable experience. And so I think, or expecting people are going to work overtime when their life might not be patterned around where that's possible for them. So I think the answer is yes. But at the same time, we do know that these businesses are, we saw that 63% experienced a decline in revenues, and 34%, a little over a third, said a decline in revenues more than 25%. So keeping in mind that all of this stuff is swirling around a time when the resiliency and the capacity to do more among the business itself has been diminished in it. So they're trying to rebuild, they're trying to build back that base and do the right thing. And but their resources are more restricted than in many cases since they were a startup.
I find myself thinking about wages a lot, actually, because it seems like in a classic, economic system, you know, if you don't have enough workers, you just raise the pay. And that's something that we've been looking for some of our lowest paid state residents for a long time. But that's not working, you know, so the classic model isn't necessarily working right now. Peter, when you consider wages and where they need to be to have a stable, you know, stability for some of our lowest paid employees, and what's happening now in the job market and among businesses, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I hear what Brian's saying about businesses, you know, raising wages as they can to attract more workers. And, you know, there's always, you know, when businesses are looking for workers, they pull out whatever tools they have, whether it's, and, you know, I don't need to lecture Brian on this, but, you know, whether it's raising wages or maybe lowering some of the qualifications or providing something like, I don't know, childcare or, you know, more predictable scheduling or more flexible scheduling. So there's that bag of tools that they can use. And yet what we're hearing, of course, is that despite doing that, a lot of businesses are having a hard time finding workers. And I really think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, it comes down to how can the state help with this situation? I mean, are we going to just go totally free market and leave these businesses to fend for themselves, leave workers to deal with the barriers themselves? Or are we going to come together as a state to address things like childcare? You know, and I don't have the stats right off the top of my head, but there are fewer people providing childcare than before because of COVID. People didn't want, you know, the risk of bringing sickness into their house and things like that. And so how can we provide as a state, how can we get together people from the business community, like Brian's organization, people, you know, legislators, workers groups, how can we address the situation like childcare? And then the other thing too is if we look geographically, we'll see that the labor force is really different in some places than others, and the whole unemployment struggle is different. One thing that I found really interesting was I looked at the counties that are called metropolitan in Michigan compared to the ones that are not, the ones that are rural or mostly rural. And of the 19 counties that have unemployment rates above 7%, 16 of those counties are rural or mostly counties counties. And so it seems like some of this is exacerbated by, you know, low population density, so jobs are further away, fewer workers, an aging workforce. As we know, many of the communities in Michigan are getting older. The younger people many of them are moving out to places where there are more jobs. And so you have a restaurant, for example, in a small town in the northern Lower Peninsula somewhere that's not a tourist attraction or whatever. You know, their worker pool is going to shrink if people are getting old and there aren't enough younger people to replace them. So and the rural and mostly rural counties account for more than 1/5 of Michigan's workforce. And this doesn't even count like rural areas in the so-called metropolitan counties. So for example, there's rural parts of Kent County and Genesee County and all that. So this is just the rural counties. And that's more than 1/5 of the workforce. So maybe what the state and the various stakeholders have to look at is, you know, is what is good for Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb, the 3 most populous counties in Michigan, the same as what is good for some of these more remote communities.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
I should say, I looked at the overall unemployment rate in the rural and mostly rural counties, and that's 5.7 compared for the metropolitan counties, it's 5.1. And surprisingly, for the Detroit area, Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb, it's 4.7%. So this is not the low unemployment rate, the worker shortage. This is not being driven or generated by Detroit or the Detroit area. The greater Detroit area, Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties collectively have a lower unemployment rate than Michigan as a whole.
I think it would be good to, to parlay that into, what are some of the levers, the public policy levers? We talked about unemployment and returning the work search and expectation to work to the process will help some. President Biden has already said that that there wasn't going to be an extension of the federal addition to unemployment after September 4th. So let's set that aside for a moment. Then what are the other levers? Childcare is a big one. So if you look at the Department of Labor statistics, we know that of the groups or the people that have left the workforce since before the pandemic, there are two major groups: so workers over age 55, but especially over age 65, and then younger workers with kids, especially women with kids. And so childcare is one of those factors. The availability and affordability of high quality childcare has been a problem, especially as Peter had pointed out, in rural areas. It's actually in some places there's literally no options, and then there's some unintended consequences when the Snyder administration, now the Whitmer administration, moving to expand preschool, but the financial model of private daycare becomes much more difficult when you expand preschool. Not that it's wrong to expand preschool, but it's just an unintended consequence that needs to be dealt with in terms of the number of providers that are out there for kids who aren't in preschool. And so there's the idea of increasing the subsidy and support to families up to 200% of poverty would be a good first move. Waiving co-pays without expecting the providers to pick up the cost of the waiver of the copay, I think would be another important move. And then given certifications and proper training, allowing more child care providers to qualify for Great Start Readiness funding for those funding slots would go a long way, where all of a sudden you'd have more providers that were in the mix. The financial sustainability behind the operation of those models would go up. The number of families that could qualify would increase, and also the size of the available workforce would increase. And so I think that you get kind of a win-win-win across the board. It would be a public-private partnership, and it's one of the areas where I'm hopeful that I stood with the governor at a press event in Grand Rapids on this subject a few weeks ago, and I've seen a lot of Republicans talking about it too. So I'm hopeful that this is an area where we can see some movement in the short term to zero in. It's a complex issue on extending the size of the workforce. There aren't a lot of levers that the government can kind of directly maneuver to make a difference. Childcare is one of those issues, though.
I'm glad you brought up the child care issue and also how it affects women in the workplace. And we've got a couple of comments from viewers about the effects of women in the workplace and how do we attract more? What can we do for women beyond that? I'm assuming some of them are the 55 plus, but some of them don't have children. But as a group, I think it's a real concern. We also have another question from a reader about like disabled workers or developmentally delayed workers, and aren't they a reasonable labor pool for employers right now? Is this an opportunity to bring more people into the labor force and make them feel like they're participants?
I think the answer is yes, but I don't want to hog the whole conversation. So Peter, do you want to maybe start, and I'll clean up after you? Sure.
Yeah. And no worries. I never thought you were hogging the conversation. I saw a very interesting report from the Center for Economic and Policy Research out of Washington, and it didn't give state-specific data on this, but it showed that the population, the subgroup with the biggest exit out of the labor force and the highest unemployment was basically mothers of minor children who did not have a college degree. And of course, that's hard to really drill down to because it's not taking into account licenses, certificates, and things short of a college degree. So, it will capture some working mothers who in fact do have a credential. But I think in general, that shows us and also what it found was that this recession, the COVID recession, unlike every other recession, has disproportionately affected women compared to men. Most recessions affect men more than women, but this one is disproportionately affecting women. And then again, especially mothers of minor children who do not have a college degree. So I think one area that we could be looking at as a state is how do we help that population? How do we address the labor issues for that population? And, again, I hate to keep bringing it back to childcare, but, it could be a situation where if their spouse is working and they have these childcare needs, the child had to study at home online. Maybe it was just a rational decision to leave the workforce entirely because of childcare. And so it really comes down to that again.
Yeah,
Brian, are you seeing any creative solutions out there? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to tack on in childcare and education. So the predictability and availability of in-person education is important. I mean, it's one of those factors that there's just, even though a lot has changed in the last generation, when school is not readily available, it is going to impact women in the workforce more than it's going to impact men. And we do see that bearing out. It's in the statistics, but it's also anecdotally, we see it all over the place. In terms of solutions, for it. The flexibility in remote work, I think, is one of the, that trend, which was started, it was a pre-pandemic trend, but is obviously dramatically accelerated throughout the pandemic. That does open up more opportunities for people to work in a much more flexible situation where they've got some scheduled time in the office, but they don't need full-time daycare. I think when it comes to the fall, when kids are hopefully back in school in a more predictable way, that there will be more parents of younger kids that feel secure, like, okay, I can go back now and just know that my life is kind of returned to normal in that sense, where the kids are in school, and this now the financial viability makes sense. I mean, there are a lot of people and I think anybody at maybe even over 60,000, but people that make below $60,000 a year, if school is out of the mix and now daycare is a full-time, like 40 or 45 hour a week daycare situation, going to work, the incremental benefit of going to work is really quite small. And so again, I go back to, it's a rational, personal, economic decision to say, you know what, I would rather just do it this way. Wait till things change out there in the environment where it's possible to go back. So having school that is offered in person in a very predictable and reliable way will make a difference. And then the support in childcare make a difference, and more flexible remote work opportunities will make a difference. So I think those are all areas where there's opportunity for employers that really want to respond to the need. I want to get to the other question, Paula, that you'd asked about people with developmental disabilities and other types of disabilities. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for employers to explore hiring people that maybe they've never thought about before. And what people with disabilities, just to do the things that you and I take for granted every day, have to be determined, and they have to have perseverance, they have to be creative and innovative. Okay, so determination, perseverance, innovation, creativity, sounds like great qualities for a workforce, right? So, and then those who have gone down this road to just intentionally, not just be open to it, but intentionally seek out and hire people with disabilities usually find that those workers have longer tenures of employment. They're more loyal and faithful. They have more job satisfaction. They like the opportunity. They love just being out and a part of the world when a lot of times they haven't had access to it otherwise. And so I think there is a golden opportunity here. The state of Michigan has a department called the Michigan Rehabilitation Services. One, I think, really good move that the Whitmer administration made was to move that from Human Services over to the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, so that people stop thinking about it as a social service, employing people with a disability as a social service, and start thinking of it as a viable, talented, and labor pool with great opportunity. And MRS has a lot of partner organizations all around the state. No matter where you're at, there is one by you. And they have people that are looking for work. They desperately want to work, always have. And in the past, employers just haven't been looking there. And I think that'll be a good opportunity.
Just put that on my future story list. That sounds amazing. Taking education in a slightly different direction, we do have a question about this, and I've been wondering too. I mean, it seems there's some irony how a year ago, when we were 400,000 restaurant jobs down, that we wanted all of those employees to go to school and to retrain and to come out a little bit better with some more opportunities. And Michigan is chronically undereducated. That's been an issue here for a long time. So we have questions about futures for frontliners, for readers. We have questions about skilled trade training and all of this. So there's just that irony that we want people to go back to school, but now we want people to fill these fast food jobs. Where does the role of the retraining and the free community college and all of this fit into that?
Well, hopefully we look at it as a continuum of education and lifelong learning. I mean, there's the idea that you have starter jobs and jobs that aren't necessarily going to be a career for many people, that's okay. But having access to education, I view education as freedom, right? It's what gives you the options of choosing whatever it is that you want to do. So following the lead of there are some other states that have tried to make at least a community college education a universal option for every person. Makes a lot of sense. In January 2019, actually, right after taking office, Governor Whitmer called me and said, hey, would you want to team up and maybe pull together the business community to support making community college universally accessible? And the answer was yes. And the reason the answer was yes is because the more people that we have that are qualified to take on the roles that are required by the economy, the better. And 2 years of community college, many people, including me, that's half of a bachelor's degree. What's the best thing that you can do in order to make a bachelor's degree more effective? Well, you can cut it in half by giving people and the cost in half by giving people access to a community college education. And my degree from Michigan State University looks exactly the same as the ones who didn't have 60 credits transferred from a community college. And so I think that there are these types of solutions. They're organically happening out there in terms of people are figuring out how to piece this together. But the more that we can take these different silos and kind of create it into a continuum of education, the better off we'll be in helping people to be able to choose, like, yeah, I'd rather have this type of job where I can go, clock in, do the work, clock out, and my responsibilities are just during those times. Or to the types of careers where maybe it is going to take more of them kind of pouring their whole life into it, but they have access to the education to go through those doors. And the more often that we do that, I think we're, again, a win-win. We're going to have a stronger workforce to draw from for employers, and we're going to have individuals that are going to be free to choose what they want to do with their life.
Great. So we're kind of heading towards the end here. I have one question from a reader. I'd like to just read here flat out and get your thoughts on this. I think it's a really good wrap. There are so many tentacles that are attributed to the labor shortage: affordable housing, childcare, adequate public transportation, to name a few. Is there a group that is looking at all of the different reasons for labor shortages and bringing them to the Michigan legislature? Seems to me issues are more important than political partisanship issues. So what are we doing as a whole? And what can we do as a whole?
Well, I'd like to answer that. And sorry about the dog barking in the background, but yeah, I feel pretty optimistic about some of what's going on now. Like the person who chatted the question, I hate partisanship, and I love when, you know, political parties work together and various groups that on the surface might look like they have conflicting interests actually find common ground and work together. And what we're seeing is, for example, Michigan Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners was passed by the Republican legislature and signed by the Democratic governor. It's bipartisan. There's a bipartisan package for childcare in the legislature right now that is, you know, it's bipartisan, and we hope it'll go somewhere. There's definitely a place to have lots of different perspectives at the table, and it actually shouldn't just be one organization with just one perspective coming to the table to talk about these things. So I'm optimistic that groups such as the business groups, my organization, the child readiness groups, groups like that can come together and figure some of this out.
Great. And Brian, I know your group is tremendously active and staying on top of absolutely everything, but are more resources needed, or do you feel like there's a cohesion in the approach among different groups too?
I do see more collaboration and cooperation among interest groups than what we have seen in the past. Part of that's out of necessity, but part of it is you know, people that they've figured out that it's better to try and align, look for common ground, build off common interests, and then essentially make it easy on the process. So you know, the legislative process is designed to be inefficient. It just is. It's power divided and spread out. It's one of the wonderful things about this country, and what makes it stable is it's hard to change things. And but if you do have issues that need to be addressed, I think a lot of the groups that have an interest in the outcomes and problems being solved are figuring out that, you know, rather than go into war with people, it's better to try and find any common ground that you can and work on those things. And so you do see that type of collaboration happening. And then also just the scope of issues. I mean, another example, it hadn't really come up in this discussion, but I think another example of an area where we and other business groups have gotten involved that where we haven't before was criminal justice reform. And so well, I personally was involved in a lot of criminal justice reform work in the legislature. It wasn't, it was kind of a redemption focus on giving people a second chance. It wasn't about economic development and expanding the size of the workforce. But it turns out that that's also a really good reason to do it. So expungement, as an example, the most recent example, where a lot of people that have had things on their record from the past are holding them back from careers, having a more automatic and more accessible expungement process if you stayed out of trouble. And that's it's like a win-win-win. And so you see this coalition coming together to make it happen that looks way different than anything that you would have seen happen 10, 20, well, even like 5 years ago in the system. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic about it. But I also think that we can't just have rose-colored glasses on, that there is the amount of division and how good the political people are at dividing people, getting people to focus in on what they're different, what's different as opposed to the common interests that they have. There are serious consequences that we face because of that. But even in spite of all that, like Peter, I'm optimistic. I mean, I do see more cooperation, more alliances that are kind of strange bedfellow type alliances, and I love to see that happen. It's inspiring to see people set aside differences to pursue a horizon where they have the same type of goals.
Great. Amber, I guess I could hand this back to you now.
All right, that sounds great. I just want to give a big thank you to our special guests today, Brian and Peter. This was such an informative discussion, and we really appreciate your participation today. Paula, thank you for your excellent moderation, and Catherine, thank you for being such a great co-host with me on this event. And also, I just want to thank all of our bridge readers who participated today. I hope you learned as much as I did. I thought it was very informative. Just a reminder that we were recording this discussion, and we'll be posting that recording in Bridge, Michigan this week. So you can visit www.bridgemi.com and you'll find the post so you can see the recording on demand and share it with anyone who may have missed this conversation. We will be resuming our monthly lunch break series in July, so stay tuned to Bridge to find out what our next topic will be and also get information about how to register. Once again, I just want to thank everyone for participating today. A special thank you to our members who make events like this possible. And I hope that you all have a very excellent and hopefully rain-free afternoon. Take care and have a great 4th of July weekend. Thanks, everyone.